The blood on her feet had frozen into the rags she'd wrapped around them 3 days ago. And Willa Foster knew that if she didn't find shelter within the hour, she would die in this God-forsaken Colorado wilderness. The November wind of 1883 cut through what remained of her cotton dress like 1,000 tiny knives, and each step forward felt like walking on broken glass, but she kept moving because stopping meant surrendering to the white death that surrounded her on all sides. She had lost track of how many miles she had walked since fleeing the trading post where her stepfather had tried to sell her to a fur trapper, twice her age. The trader's hands had been rough and stank of whiskey, and when he'd grabbed her arm with that possessive grip, something inside Willa had snapped. She'd waited until everyone slept, stolen what little food she could carry, and run into the night. That had been before the snow started falling. Before the temperature dropped so low that her breath came out in painful gasps. Before she'd lost the food bag while crossing a half-frozen stream. The landscape ahead blurred, white bleeding into more white, and Willa stumbled over a snow-covered rock. She caught herself on her hands, felt the ice bite into her palms, and for a long moment she considered just staying down. How easy it would be to close her eyes and let the cold take her. At least it wouldn't hurt anymore. At least she'd be free. But then she saw it through the swirling snow, a dark shape in the distance. At first, she thought it was just another trick of her failing vision, but as she blinked hard and squinted, she could make out the distinct outline of buildings. A town, or at least some kind of settlement. Hope surged through her chest, painful and fierce, and she forced herself back to her feet. Her legs shook so badly she could barely stand, but she locked her knees and took one step forward. Then another. Then another. The world tilted sideways, and Willa realized she was falling. The snow rushed up to meet her face, and this time the darkness came with it. She woke to warmth. Not the gentle warmth of a summer day, but intense, almost painful heat against her frozen skin. Willa tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt crusted shut. She managed to force them open a crack and saw orange light dancing across rough wooden walls. A fire. Someone had built a fire. "Easy now." The voice was deep and male, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who'd spent time in the Southern Territories. "Don't try to move too fast. You've got frostbite in your feet and hands." Willa turned her head toward the voice and saw him for the first time. He was crouched beside her, and even in her disoriented state, she could tell he was young, probably not more than 25. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, with sun-creased eyes and wind-chapped lips, but his features were handsome in a rugged way. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that seemed to catch the firelight. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough and broken. "My ranch, about 2 miles outside Manassas. I was riding back from checking the north fence line when I found you face down in a snowdrift." He reached for something beside him and held up a tin cup. "Think you can drink some broth? You need to get something warm in you." Willa tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her head spun and pain shot through every inch of her body. The man caught her shoulder with one calloused hand, steadying her. "Slow," he said again. "You've been out for a few hours. Your body's been through hell." He helped her lean back against something soft. Pillows. Real feather pillows, not the straw-stuffed sacks she'd grown up with. Willa looked down at herself and realized with a start that she was wearing different clothes. A thick wool nightshirt that hung to her knees, far too large for her frame, and heavy wool socks on her bandaged feet. Her face must have shown her alarm because the man held up both hands in a calming gesture. "My sister helped with the clothes," he said quickly. "Clara. She's sleeping in the next room. We got the wet rags off you and wrapped your feet proper. Didn't seem right to leave you in those frozen things." Willa's throat tightened. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return. "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why help me?" The man looked at her like she'd asked why the sun rose in the morning. Because you needed help. He offered the cup again. Name's James Garrett. Most folks call me Jamie. This is my ranch, such as it is. Got about 200 acres and more cattle than good sense, according to my sister. She took the cup with shaking hands, and he steadied it when it nearly slipped from her grip. The broth was rich and salty, with chunks of beef and vegetables floating in it. Willa took a small sip, then another, and had to fight the urge to gulp it all down at once. Slow sips, Jamie said. Your stomach's been empty too long to handle much at once. Willa, she managed between sips. Willa Foster. Pleased to meet you, Miss Foster, though I wish it had been under better circumstances. He settled back on his heels, watching her with those striking eyes. You want to tell me how you ended up walking through a snowstorm in nothing but rags? The question hung in the air between them. Willa considered lying, making up some story that would paint her in a better light, but something about Jamie's steady gaze made her want to tell the truth. I was running away. From what? My stepfather. He was trying to marry me off to a man I'd never met. A fur trader up near the Wyoming border who offered him $50 and 3 horses for me. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. I guess he figured that was a fair price. Jamie's jaw tightened and something dark flickered across his face. Where's your mother? Dead. 2 years back. Fever took her. Willa finished the broth and set the cup down, suddenly exhausted again. There wasn't anybody else to stand up for me. And you've been walking since you ran? 4 days, I think. Maybe 5. I lost track after the snow started. Her eyes drifted to the fire, watching the flames dance. I thought I was going to die out there. I was ready to die. But you didn't. Jamie stood and walked to a large wooden chest against the wall. He opened it and pulled out a thick wool blanket, which he draped over her shoulders on top of the one she was already wrapped in. You've got fight in you, Miss Foster. That's worth something. A door creaked open, and a young woman appeared in the doorway. She was small and fine-boned, with the same dark hair as Jamie but lighter eyes, more gray than blue. She wore a simple calico dress and had a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She's awake. Clara Garrett's voice held a note of relief. She crossed the room quickly and knelt beside Willa, pressing one cool hand to her forehead. Fever's down. That's good. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle, Willa admitted. Clara laughed, a bright sound that seemed to warm the room more than the fire did. I imagine so. Jamie found you just in time. Another hour out there and we'd be planning a funeral instead of a recovery. She glanced at her brother. Has she eaten? Just some broth. I'll make more and bring some bread. Got to get your strength back, Miss Foster. Clara patted Willa's hand gently. You're safe here. Jamie and I, we don't hold with the kind of men who'd sell their own kin like livestock. Willa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She hadn't cried when her mother died, hadn't cried when her stepfather struck her for talking back, hadn't even cried when she'd been stumbling through the snow, certain she was going to freeze to death. But this simple kindness from strangers threatened to break something inside her that she'd kept locked away for years. Thank you, she whispered. Both of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't worry about that now. Jamie moved toward the door, following his sister. You just focus on healing up. We'll figure out the rest later. The days that followed passed in a blur of sleep and small meals. Clara was a constant presence, changing the bandages on Willa's feet, bringing her soup and bread, sitting beside her bed to read aloud from books Willa had never even dreamed of owning. Jamie appeared less frequently, usually in the evenings after he'd finished the day's work on the ranch, but when he did come, he always had something to make her smile. A funny story about an ornery cow, a carved wooden bird he'd made during a slow afternoon. Once he brought her a handful of dried wildflowers he'd found pressed between the pages of an old book. On the fifth day, Willa felt strong enough to sit up without help, and on the sixth, she insisted on trying to stand. Her feet were still tender, and the doctor who'd ridden out from Manasseh warned her that she'd lost 2 toes on her left foot to frostbite, but she could walk with help. Clara found her a dress that had belonged to their mother, altered to fit Willa's taller frame, and Jamie carved her a walking stick from a smooth piece of pine. You don't have to rush, Clara said as she helped Willa take her first shaky steps across the room. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I can't impose on your kindness forever. Willa gripped the walking stick hard, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other. You've already done so much. It's not an imposition if we're offering. Clara guided her to a chair by the window, where winter sunlight streamed through the glass. To be honest, I'm glad for the company. It gets lonely out here with just Jamie and the ranch hands. Most of them can barely string 2 words together that aren't about cows or weather. Willa sank into the chair gratefully, her legs already trembling from the exertion. Outside, she could see the ranch spread out before her. Snow still covered the ground, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of pristine, white, broken only by the dark shapes of cattle in the distance and the network of fences that divided the property. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. How long have you and Jamie been out here? She asked. 3 years. We came out from Missouri after our parents died. Cholera epidemic swept through our town, took half the population with it. Clara's voice was matter of fact, but Willa could hear the old pain underneath. Jamie had always wanted to ranch, and I wanted to be somewhere new, somewhere that didn't remind me of everything we'd lost. So we sold what little we had, bought this land, and started over. Just the two of you? Jamie was 22. I was 19. Everyone told us we were crazy, that we'd never make it. Clara smiled, a fierce expression that transformed her delicate features. We proved them wrong. It hasn't been easy, but we've built something real here, something that's ours. Willa looked at her own hands, still wrapped in bandages. I don't have anything. No money, no family, no skills worth mentioning. I can sew a little and cook if someone tells me what to make, but that's about it. Everyone has skills. You just need to figure out what yours are. Clara settled into the chair across from her. And you've got time to do that. Like I said, you're welcome here as long as you want to stay. That evening, Willa insisted on joining Jamie and Clara for dinner at the kitchen table instead of eating in bed. It took her a while to navigate the short distance from the bedroom to the kitchen, but she managed it with her walking stick and only a little help from Clara. Jamie was already seated when they arrived, and he stood immediately, pulling out a chair for Willa. Look at you up and around. His smile was genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. Doc Brennan said it'd be 2 weeks before you were walking. Guess he doesn't know how stubborn you are yet. I'm learning that stubbornness is a Foster family trait, Clara said, bringing a pot of stew to the table. She insisted on helping me peel potatoes this afternoon. Only fair since I'm eating them, Willa said. The simple act of sitting at a table with other people, sharing a meal like family, felt almost overwhelming. I need to start earning my keep somehow. You're still healing. Jamie ladled stew into her bowl, then his own. Give yourself time. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Willa found herself studying Jamie when she thought he wasn't looking. He had a quiet strength about him, the kind that came from hard work and harder choices. His hands were scarred and calloused, but he handled the simple dishes with surprising care. When he caught her watching him, he didn't look away or make some crude comment like the men she'd known back at the trading post. He just smiled slightly and asked if she wanted more bread. After dinner, Clara excused herself to work on some mending, leaving Willa and Jamie alone at the table. Willa thought about retreating to the bedroom, but something made her stay. Maybe it was the way the lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, or the comfortable silence that had settled between them, but she felt more at peace than she had in years. Can I ask you something? Jamie's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Of course. What were you planning to do? If you'd made it to Manasseh, I mean. Did you have somewhere to go? Willa shook her head. I didn't think that far ahead. I just knew I had to get away. Figured I'd find work somewhere. Maybe as a seamstress or a cook. I'm 18 now, old enough to make my own way. She laughed bitterly. Seems foolish now, doesn't it? Running off into a snowstorm with no plan and no supplies. Seems brave to me. Jamie leaned back in his chair, his eyes serious. You saw a future you didn't want, and you risked everything to change it. That takes courage. Or desperation. Maybe both. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Clara meant what she said earlier. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. We could use help around the ranch, especially now with winter setting in hard. Clara's been trying to manage the house and help with the outdoor work, and it's too much for one person. If you wanted to stay on, earn some wages, you'd be doing us a favor. Willa looked at him carefully, searching for any sign of ulterior motives, but she saw only sincerity in his face. You'd pay me? Even though I haven't done anything yet? You'd be working for it. Cooking, cleaning, helping Clara with the preserves and the chickens. Come spring, maybe helping with the garden if your feet are healed enough. Nothing you can't handle but honest work for honest pay. He named a sum that made Willa's eyes widen. It wasn't a fortune, but it was fair. More than fair. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. You don't know anything about me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse. Jamie smiled then, a real smile that changed his whole face. You're none of those things, I can tell. And even if I'm wrong, well, that's my mistake to make. He stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. You don't have to decide tonight. Think it over, but the offer stands. That night, lying in the soft bed with warm blankets piled around her, Willa did think it over. She thought about the alternative, trying to make it on her own in Manasseh with no references, no connections, and feet that might never fully heal. She thought about the kindness Clara had shown her, the gentle way she tended to Willa's wounds and never once made her feel like a burden. Most of all, she thought about Jamie, about the way he looked at her like she was a person worth saving, not property to be bought and sold. By morning, she'd made her decision. Winter deepened over the next few weeks, and Willa settled into life at the Garrett ranch with surprising ease. Her feet healed slowly, and though she walked with a slight limp that the doctor said would probably never fully disappear, she found she could manage most tasks without too much pain. Clara taught her how to make proper bread, how to render lard and make soap, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long months ahead. Willa proved to be a quick learner, and soon she was handling many of the household tasks that had been overwhelming Clara. But it was the quiet moments that Willa treasured most. Evenings spent by the fire while Clara read aloud and Jamie carved small figures from scraps of wood. Sunday afternoons when they'd bundle up against the cold and walk to the southern pasture to check on the pregnant cows. The morning ritual of coffee and planning the day's work, the three of them gathered around the kitchen table like a real family. Willa tried not to notice the way her heart beat faster when Jamie entered a room. Tried not to think about the way his hands looked when he worked, strong and capable. Tried not to read too much into the small kindnesses he showed her. The way he always made sure she had the chair closest to the fire, or how he'd started carving her a new walking stick from cherry wood because he thought it would be prettier than the pine one. She was a guest in his home, a charity case he'd rescued from the snow, nothing more. But then came the day in early December when everything changed. Jamie had ridden out before dawn to check on a report of wolves near the northern herd. He'd expected to be back by noon, but afternoon came and went with no sign of him. Clara tried to hide her worry, but Willa could see the way she kept glancing out the window, the way her hands trembled slightly as she kneaded bread dough. By the time the sun started to set, they were both frightened. Should we send someone to look for him? Willa asked. One of the ranch hands? They're all at the Southline cabin. Won't be back until tomorrow. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Jamie knows this land better than anyone. He'll be fine. He has to be fine. But her voice lacked conviction, and Willa felt cold fear settle in her stomach. She knew what could happen to someone caught out in this weather. She'd lived it. They kept the lamps burning in the windows, a beacon in case Jamie had gotten turned around in the dark. Clara made coffee, though neither of them drank it. Willa paced as much as her feet would allow, wearing a path between the kitchen and the front window. Please, she prayed to a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please let him be safe. Please bring him home. It was nearly midnight when they heard the sound of hoofbeats. Clara and Willa rushed to the door together, flinging it open to reveal Jamie dismounting from his horse. He was covered in snow and moving stiffly, but he was alive and apparently unhurt. Sorry, he said immediately, seeing their faces. Didn't mean to worry you. Horse threw a shoe, and it took me hours to walk him back. Clara hugged him fiercely, not caring that he was wet and cold. You scared me half to death, Jamie Garrett. I know, I'm sorry. He hugged her back, then looked over her head at Willa. Something in his expression made her breath catch. Let me get this horse settled, and I'll explain everything. While he was in the barn, Clara made fresh coffee and heated up leftover stew. Willa couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she set out bowls and spoons. The fear she'd felt, the bone-deep terror of losing Jamie, had revealed something she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She cared about him, not just as the man who'd saved her life or her employer, but as something more, something deeper. When Jamie came back inside, he'd shed his wet coat and boots. He sat at the table and accepted the bowl of stew gratefully, eating with the single-minded focus of a man who'd missed several meals. Clara and Willa watched him, waiting. Finally, he pushed the empty bowl away and looked at them both. Found the wolves. 3 of them, and they'd already killed 2 calves. I managed to drive them off, but it took longer than I expected, and by the time I finished, Buck had picked up a stone in his shoe. Couldn't get it out, and he went lame on me. I had to walk him most of the way back. You could have frozen, Clara said quietly. But I didn't. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm fine, Clara. Just tired and hungry, and now that problem's solved. Clara stood abruptly. I'm going to bed. Some of us need sleep, even if you don't. But she kissed the top of his head before she left. Glad you're home, brother. After she left, Willa started gathering the dishes, needing something to do with her hands. Jamie stood and helped her, carrying them to the basin without being asked. You were worried too, he said softly. It wasn't a question. Willa kept her eyes on the dishes, scrubbing them harder than necessary. Of course I was. You saved my life. Clara is my friend. Why wouldn't I be worried? I didn't mean to scare you. Well, you did. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. I know what it's like out there. I know how fast things can go wrong. When you didn't come back, I thought... She stopped, unable to finish. Jamie moved closer, and she felt his hand gentle on her shoulder. Hey, look at me. She turned, and suddenly they were standing very close in the small kitchen. The lamplight threw shadows across his face, making his eyes darker, more intense. She could see a small scar on his chin that she'd never noticed before, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. I'm sorry I scared you, he said again, his voice low. But I'm here, I'm safe. Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. She should step back, put distance between them, but she couldn't make herself move. Jamie raised his other hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Willa, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something precious. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe they both did. But suddenly his arms were around her, and she was pressed against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and it felt like coming home. They stood like that for a long moment, neither speaking, just holding each other in the quiet kitchen. When they finally pulled apart, Jamie kept his hands on her shoulders. I need to tell you something. What? The day I found you in the snow, I thought you were already dead. You weren't moving and you were so cold. His voice roughened. But then I saw you were still breathing, and I've never moved faster in my life. Got you on my horse, got you back here, and the whole time I was terrified you wouldn't make it. He paused. And then you did make it, and you stayed. And these past few weeks have been the best I've had in a long time. Maybe ever. Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Jamie, I'm saying this wrong. He gave a frustrated laugh. What I'm trying to say is that I care about you, not like a guest or an employee. I care about you like a man cares about a woman he's starting to fall in love with. He searched her face, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. And if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. You can stay here as long as you want, and I promise I won't make things awkward. But I had to tell you, after tonight, after realizing you were worried about me, I had to tell you. Willa felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. In her wildest dreams, she hadn't imagined this. Jamie Garrett, this good, kind, capable man, saying he was falling in love with her. I thought I was going to die when you didn't come home, she whispered. I kept thinking about all the things I'd never get to say to you, about how you made me feel safe for the first time in my life, about how I watch for you in the mornings and listen for your footsteps at night, about how She took a shaky breath. About how I think I might be falling in love with you too. The smile that spread across Jamie's face was like sunrise. Yeah? Yeah, she laughed, giddy and terrified all at once. I know it's probably too soon, and I'm probably reading too much into things, but when I thought you might be hurt or worse, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. Jamie cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her cheeks. Can I kiss you? Instead of answering, Willa rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first, then deeper as they both relaxed into it. His arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and she wound her hands into his hair, marveling at how right this felt, how perfectly they seemed to fit together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jamie rested his forehead against hers. I should probably court you properly, take you to town socials, bring you flowers, all that romantic stuff. Willa laughed. We're living in the same house. I think we might have skipped ahead a few steps. Guess so. He kissed her again, quick and light. But I'm going to do this right, Willa Foster. I'm going to court you and marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy, if you'll have me. You're asking me to marry you? Her voice came out as a squeak. Eventually. Not today, obviously. We should probably spend more than a month knowing each other before we make it official. He grinned. But yeah, I'm saying my intentions are serious. I want a future with you. Want to build this ranch into something great and have you by my side while I do it. Willa thought about the girl she'd been just a month ago, stumbling through the snow, ready to die. That girl had been running from a future she couldn't control, terrified and alone. But the woman she was now, standing in this warm kitchen with this good man's arms around her, she wasn't running anymore. She was choosing this life, this man, this chance at happiness. My intentions are serious too, she said softly. And I want that future. With you. They sealed the promise with another kiss, and outside the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, but inside they were warm and safe and together. The next morning, Clara took one look at them over breakfast and said, Finally, I thought you two were going to dance around each other all winter. Jamie nearly choked on his coffee. You knew? Of course I knew. I have eyes, don't I? She helped herself to more eggs, looking pleased with herself. Willa's been watching you like you hung the moon, and you've been finding excuses to come inside every hour to check on her. It was obvious. Willa felt her face heat. We weren't trying to hide anything. Good, because you're both terrible at it. Clara's expression softened. I'm happy for you, both of you. You're good together. Over the following weeks, Jamie made good on his promise to court Willa properly. He brought her wildflowers he found pressed in old books, taught her to ride his gentlest mare despite her injured feet, and took her into Manasseh for a church social where he introduced her to everyone as his intended. The town was small, only about 300 people, but they were friendly enough once they got past their curiosity about the mysterious woman Jamie Garrett had rescued from the snow. Willa met the shopkeeper, Mrs. Henderson, who immediately offered her work helping with inventory if she ever needed extra money. She met Doc Brennan's wife, Sarah, who invited her to the weekly quilting circle. She even met the school teacher, Miss Phillips, who mentioned they were always looking for help with the younger children. But mostly she got to know Jamie. She learned that he loved sunrise more than sunset, that he could play the harmonica but was too shy to perform in front of anyone except Clara, that his mother had died giving birth to him, and he'd carried guilt about that his whole life until Clara finally convinced him it wasn't his fault. She learned that he wanted at least 4 children someday, that he dreamed of expanding the ranch to include horses as well as cattle, that he thought the new railroad coming through Colorado was going to change everything. In turn, she told him things she'd never told anyone. About the mother who'd loved her, but been too worn down by life to fight for her. About the stepfather who'd seen her as a burden from the day he married her mother. About the dreams she'd had as a little girl of running away to San Francisco and becoming a seamstress for fancy ladies, dreams she'd put away as childish fantasy. Jamie listened to all of it, never judging, never telling her she should feel different than she did. San Francisco's not so far, he said one evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out. Maybe we could visit someday, after we're married, after the ranch is more established. You do that? Travel all that way just so I could see a city? I'd do a lot more than that to make you happy. He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt to be this close to him. Christmas came, and Clara organized a small celebration. They didn't have much money for presents, but Willa made Jamie a new shirt from fabric Clara had been saving, and he gave her the finished cherry wood walking stick, carved with a pattern of wildflowers along the shaft. Clara gave them both knitted scarves and pretended not to notice when they snuck outside to kiss under the stars. On New Year's Eve, as 1883 turned to 1884, Jamie took Willa's hand and led her outside into the cold, clear night. The snow crunched under their feet as they walked a little way from the house, far enough that they could see the entire valley spread out below them, silvered in moonlight. I know I said I'd wait longer, Jamie said, reaching into his pocket. But I've been thinking, and life's too short to wait when you know what you want. He pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the moonlight. It was my mother's. Clara's been saving it for me, waiting for the right woman. He looked at her, and even in the darkness she could see the love in his eyes. You're the right woman, Willa. You're brave and strong and kind, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me? Willa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. Yes, yes, of course I'll marry you. Jamie slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Willa kissed him back with all the love and hope and fierce joy that filled her heart. They were married in February, in the small church in Manasseh, with Clara as witness and half the town in attendance. Willa wore a dress that had belonged to Jamie's mother, altered by Clara's skilled hands to fit her perfectly. Jamie wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, and when he saw Willa walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The ceremony was simple, the words familiar. But when Willa said, "I do," and Jamie slipped a second ring onto her finger, a wedding band to match the engagement ring, She felt something settle deep in her soul. This was home. This was family. This was the future she'd been stumbling toward through that snowstorm, though she hadn't known it at the time. The reception was held at the ranch, with Clara and several neighbor women providing food and Doc Brennan's brother playing fiddle. They danced in the kitchen, which had been cleared of furniture for the occasion, and Willa laughed more than she could remember laughing in her entire life. At one point, Jamie pulled her outside for a moment of quiet, and they stood together under the stars, married now, bound together by law and love. Happy? He asked, his arms around her waist. Happier than I ever thought possible, she answered honestly. 4 months ago, I was ready to die in the snow. Now I'm married to the best man I've ever known, with a home and a family and a future. It feels like a dream. It's not a dream. Jamie kissed her softly. It's real. We're real. And this is just the beginning, Willa Garrett. Willa Garrett. She smiled at her new name, at the way it sounded in his voice. I like that. Being a Garrett. Good, because you're stuck with it now. That night, after the guests had gone home, and Clara had tactfully retreated to the guest room she'd been sleeping in for the past week, Willa and Jamie finally had the house to themselves. They lay together in the big bed that had been Jamie's alone for so long, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and whispered words. It was sweet and a little awkward, both of them being inexperienced, but it was also perfect because it was them, together, starting their married life the way they meant to continue. Afterward, Willa lay with her head on Jamie's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, feeling his fingers trace lazy patterns on her shoulder. Tell me something, she said sleepily. That day you found me in the snow. What made you go that way? You said you were checking the north fence line, but that's not where you found me. Jamie was quiet for a moment. I heard something, or thought I did. Like someone calling out. It was probably just the wind, but something made me turn Buck that direction. His arm tightened around her. I'm glad I listened to it. Glad I found you when I did. Me too. Willa kissed his chest right over his heart. I was so scared, Jamie, I'd given up. I was ready to just lie down and let the cold take me. But then I saw the town in the distance and something made me keep walking. One more step, then another, then another. You're a fighter. That's one of the things I love about you. I didn't feel like a fighter. I felt like a coward, running away. Running away from a man who wanted to sell you isn't cowardly. It's survival. Jamie shifted so he could look at her face. And you walked for miles through a blizzard with nothing but rags to keep you warm. You survived when most people wouldn't have. That's not cowardice. That's courage. Willa thought about that, about the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Maybe he was right. Maybe surviving was its own kind of courage. Maybe choosing to keep living, to keep fighting for a better future was the bravest thing she could have done. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Jamie kissed her forehead. Now sleep. We've got a ranch to run in the morning, Mrs. Garrett. Spring came slowly to Colorado that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born in the south pasture. The garden burst into green as Clara and Willa planted vegetables and herbs, and the world seemed full of possibility. Clara announced in April that she'd been corresponding with a man from Alamosa, a banker named Robert Hayes, and that she thought she might be falling in love with him. He's coming to visit next month, she told Willa and Jamie over dinner one evening, her cheeks flushed with excitement. I thought maybe we could have him stay here for a few days, if that's not too much trouble. Of course it's not trouble, Willa said immediately. I want to meet this man who's captured your heart. Clara laughed. I don't know if he's captured my heart yet, but he's certainly got my attention. She looked between Jamie and Willa. I know you two are still newlyweds, and I don't want to intrude on your time together. I've been thinking maybe it's time I found a place of my own anyway. Absolutely not, Jamie said firmly. This is your home, Clara. It'll always be your home. And if this Robert Hayes is half the man you deserve, he'll understand that family comes first. Robert Hayes turned out to be everything Clara had described and more. He was 30 years old, with kind eyes and an easy smile, and it was obvious from the moment he arrived that he was genuinely smitten with Clara. He treated her with respect and affection, listened when she talked about her dreams of opening a small bakery in town, and won Jamie over completely by spending an entire afternoon helping repair the barn roof without being asked. By the end of his visit, he'd proposed to Clara on one knee in the garden, with Willa and Jamie watching from the kitchen window, and Clara had said yes. They were married in June in the same church where Willa and Jamie had wed, and the celebration was twice as large because Robert knew so many people from his work at the bank. Willa stood as Clara's witness, and Jamie stood for Robert, and when the ceremony was over and Clara and Robert rode off toward their new home in Alamosa, Willa cried happy tears. "You're losing your sister," she said as she and Jamie waved goodbye. "No." Jamie pulled her close. "I'm gaining a brother, and Clara's only an hour's ride away. We'll see her all the time." He was right. Clara and Robert visited often, and Willa and Jamie made the trip to Alamosa nearly every month. Clara did open her bakery, and it was a roaring success with people coming from 3 towns over to buy her bread and cakes. Robert's bank prospered, and they bought a beautiful house on Main Street with room for the children they planned to have someday. Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued. Jamie hired 2 more hands as the herd grew, and Willa learned to manage the household accounts and help with the buying and selling of cattle. She discovered she had a head for numbers and a talent for negotiation that surprised everyone, including herself. In August, Willa woke up feeling sick for the 3rd morning in a row. At first, she thought it was something she'd eaten, but when the nausea persisted and her monthly courses failed to arrive, she began to suspect the truth. Doc Brennan confirmed it in September. She was pregnant, due sometime in early April. Jamie's reaction when she told him was everything she'd hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down carefully and immediately started worrying about whether she should be doing less work, should be resting more, should see the doctor more often. "Jamie, I'm pregnant, not dying," Willa said, amused. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." But his concern was touching, and as the months passed and her belly grew, he became even more protective. He insisted she stop helping with the heavier chores, brought her tea in the mornings when the nausea was worst, and spent his evenings reading to her from a book on childbirth he'd ordered from Denver. Winter came again, and with it, memories of the previous year. On the anniversary of the day Jamie had found her, Willa stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape, marveling at how much had changed in just 1 year. Jamie came up behind her, wrapping his arms carefully around her swollen middle. "What are you thinking about?" "About how different everything is now. A year ago, I was dying in that snow. Now I'm here, married to you, carrying our child." She leaned back against him. "It feels like a miracle. You're the miracle." Jamie rested his chin on her shoulder. "You survived when you shouldn't have. You fought your way to me, to us. I was just trying to stay alive. And look what happened because you did. Look at the life we've built." His hands spread protectively over her belly. "Our son or daughter is going to grow up here, safe and loved, never doubting for a moment that they're wanted. That's because of you, Willa. Because you were brave enough to run, strong enough to survive." Willa turned in his arms, awkward with the bulk of her pregnancy, and kissed him softly. "It's because of you, too. You're the one who saved me. You're the one who gave me a home and a family and a reason to keep living." "We saved each other," Jamie said simply. "That's what love is." April came with warmer winds and the promise of spring, and with it came the labor pains that woke Willa in the middle of the night. Jamie rode for Doc Brennan while Sarah Brennan, who'd been staying with them for the past week in anticipation, helped Willa through the early contractions. Clara arrived before dawn, having ridden through the night when Robert brought word from the doctor, and she held Willa's hand through the long hours of labor. The baby arrived just after sunrise, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's striking eyes. When Doc Brennan placed him in Willa's arms, she felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Jamie's, a new life they'd created together. Jamie came in moments later, still dusty from his frantic ride to the doctor and back, and when he saw Willa holding their son, he stopped in the doorway like he'd been struck. Slowly, he crossed the room and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking at the tiny face with wonder. "He's perfect," Jamie whispered. "He's absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" Willa asked. Jamie nodded, and she carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Watching her strong, capable husband hold their newborn son with such gentle care made Willa's eyes fill with tears. This was the future she'd been walking toward through that snowstorm. This moment, this family, this love. "What should we name him?" Jamie asked, his eyes never leaving the baby's face. They'd discussed names for months, but never quite settled on one they both loved. Now, looking at her son, Willa knew exactly what he should be called. "William," she said softly, "after my mother's father, and Michael for the middle name, after yours. William Michael Garrett." Jamie tried it out, then smiled. "Billy, I like it." "Me too." Clara peeked around the doorway, grinning. "Can I meet my nephew now, or are you two going to hog him all day?" They spent the rest of the morning introducing Billy to his aunt and uncle, and by afternoon several of the ranch hands had stopped by to congratulate them and peek at the baby. Willa dozed on and off, exhausted from the labor, but too happy to really sleep. That evening, when everyone had finally gone home and the house was quiet, Willa lay in bed with Billy nursing at her breast, and Jamie stretched out beside them, his hand resting lightly on her leg. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the walls, and outside she could hear the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. "Thank you," Jamie said quietly. "For what?" "For walking through that snow, for surviving, for giving me this." He gestured to encompass all of it, the baby, the family, the life they'd built together. "For giving me everything I never knew I wanted." Willa reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I should be thanking you. You're the one who found me, who saved me, who gave me warm wool when I had nothing but rags. We can thank each other." Jamie leaned over and kissed her forehead, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "But mostly, I just want to love you for the rest of our lives. That's a deal I can accept." The years that followed were full of the normal joys and struggles of ranch life. There were harsh winters and dry summers, good years when the cattle prices were high, and lean years when they barely broke even. Billy grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then an adventurous little boy who followed his father everywhere and pestered his mother with endless questions. When Billy was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose, who had her mother's stubborn chin and her father's quick smile. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful from the moment he was born. Clara and Robert had children too, 2 daughters who visited often and played with their cousins until the ranch rang with children's laughter. The ranch prospered. Jamie's dream of raising horses alongside cattle became reality when he purchased 3 mares and a stallion from a retiring rancher in Wyoming. Willa's head for numbers led to smart investments that paid off handsomely. They expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, and hired a permanent cook so Willa could focus on managing the business side of the ranch. Through it all, through the busy days and exhausted nights, through the triumphs and setbacks, Willa and Jamie's love only grew stronger. They made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, taking rides together across the land they'd built their life on, never taking for granted what they'd found in each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jamie took Willa back to the spot where he'd found her in the snow. It was summer now, and wildflowers covered the ground where she'd nearly died. They spread a blanket and sat together, watching their children play in the distance under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, Willa said, leaning against Jamie's shoulder. That I get to be here with you, with them, that I didn't die in that snow. You were always meant to survive, Jamie said. You were always meant to find your way to me. Do you really believe that? That we were meant to be? I do. He pulled her closer. I think about that day all the time, about what made me turn Buck in that direction, what made me look twice at what could have been just another snowdrift. Something guided me to you, Willa. Call it fate or luck or divine intervention, but something wanted us to find each other. Willa thought about the girl she'd been, walking through that blizzard, certain she was going to die. If someone had told her then that 10 years later she'd be sitting in a field of wildflowers with her husband and their children playing nearby, she never would have believed it. But here she was, living proof that sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. I'm glad I kept walking, she said softly. I'm glad I didn't give up. So am I. Jamie kissed the top of her head. Every single day, I'm grateful you kept going, that you survived, that you gave us a chance. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, painting the mountains in shades of orange and pink. Billy called out something to Emma, and her laughter carried across the field. Samuel was picking flowers, gathering them into a careful bouquet he'd probably present to his mother with serious ceremony. Thank you, Willa said suddenly, for giving me warm wool when I had nothing but rags, for seeing me as more than just a burden to be saved, for loving me. Jamie turned her face toward his eyes serious. You were never a burden, Willa. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were special. I knew you were worth saving, worth loving. He kissed her softly. And I'll keep loving you for the rest of my life. Promise? Promise. As the years continued to pass, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Jamie's horses gained a reputation for their quality and temperament, and buyers came from as far as Kansas and Wyoming to purchase them. Willa's business acumen meant they weathered the economic panics and droughts that destroyed many neighboring ranches. They became pillars of the Manasseh community, helping to fund the new school and donating money to build a proper church building to replace the small cabin that had served for so long. Billy grew into a tall, capable young man with his father's love of the land and his mother's sharp mind. At 19, he married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Margaret, who fit into the family as if she'd always been there. Emma proved to have a talent for training horses, and by the time she was 16, she was handling the horse operation alongside her father. Samuel surprised everyone by developing a passion for books and learning, and at 18, he left for Denver to study law, though he came home every summer to help with the ranch. Clara and Robert's girls grew up alongside the Garrett children, and the two families remained close, celebrating holidays and milestones together. Robert's bank grew into one of the most important financial institutions in the region, and Clara's bakery remained a beloved fixture of Alamosa's main street. On Willa's 40th birthday, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of voices and laughter, children and grandchildren running through the rooms that had once been so quiet. Billy's wife was pregnant with their second child, Emma was courting a young man from Alamosa that everyone approved of, and Samuel had just passed his bar examination and was considering opening a practice in Manasseh. That evening, after the party had wound down and most of the family had gone home or to bed, Willa and Jamie took a walk under the stars. It was August, warm and clear, and the ranch stretched out around them, familiar and beloved. Remember when it was just us? Willa asked, slipping her hand into Jamie's. And Clara, of course. But remember how quiet it was? I remember. Jamie squeezed her hand. I loved those early days. Just starting out, figuring out how to be married, building our life together. But you don't miss it? Sometimes, maybe. but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. Willa, look at what we've built. Not just the ranch, but our family, our legacy. That's because of you. Because you were strong enough to walk through that snow, brave enough to accept my help, smart enough to build this life with me. Willa leaned into his touch, this man who'd saved her life so many years ago and continued to save it every day with his love and support. We built it together. Together, Jamie agreed. He kissed her, and even after 20 years of marriage, Willa felt the same flutter in her stomach, the same warmth spreading through her chest. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I've loved you from almost the beginning, and I'll love you until the end. That's a long time. Not long enough. They stood together under the stars, holding each other, while the ranch settled around them and their family slept safe in the house. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and one of the horses nickered softly in response. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the miles she'd walked through snow with nothing but rags, about the cowboy who dressed her in warm wool and given her a future she'd never dared dream of. Every choice, every step, every moment of pain and fear had led her to this. To Jamie, to their family, to this life that was more than she'd ever imagined possible. What are you thinking about? Jamie asked, as he had so many times over the years. About how grateful I am, Willa said honestly. For all of it, the good and the bad, because the bad led me to you. And I'm grateful you kept walking, Jamie said. That you didn't give up. That you let me love you. Always, Willa promised. I'll always let you love me. Good, because I plan on doing it for a very long time. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future brought them, secure in the knowledge that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. The ranch stood solid and strong around them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside, their children and grandchildren slept, safe and loved. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Billy and Margaret had 3 children and took over more of the ranch operations as Jamie grew older. Emma married her young man, a horse trainer from New Mexico, and they started their own ranch with a wedding gift of land from Jamie and Willa. Samuel practiced law in Manassas, gaining a reputation as a fair and honest attorney, and eventually entered politics, serving in the state legislature. Jamie's hair turned gray, then white, and his hands became gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes remained sharp, and his love for Willa never wavered. Willa's limp became more pronounced as her joints stiffened with age, but she still managed the ranch accounts with the same sharp mind she'd always had. Clara passed away peacefully in 1910 with Robert and her daughters by her side. The whole family attended the funeral, and Willa held Jamie's hand as they said goodbye to the woman who'd been such a crucial part of their story. Robert followed her just 2 years later, his heart giving out in his sleep. In 1915, when Willa was 52 and Jamie 57, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary with a simple dinner, just the 2 of them. Most of their children had families and homes of their own now, though Billy and Margaret still lived on the ranch with their children. 31 years, Willa marveled, looking at their joined hands across the table. Hers were wrinkled and spotted with age. His were scarred and weathered, but they fit together as perfectly as they had on their wedding day. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you found me in that snow. Sometimes it feels like I've known you my whole life, Jamie replied, like there was never a time before you. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, marrying me, building this life? Jamie looked at her like she'd asked if the sun would rise the next morning. Never. Not once. Not even for a second. He stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Garrett. You and our children and this life we've built together. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Willa rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. the same heart that had called to hers across a snowy field so many years ago. I love you, Jamie. I love you too. Always have, always will. They danced slowly in the kitchen, no music needed, just the two of them swaying together like they had at their wedding reception 3 decades earlier. Outside, the ranch continued its endless cycle of life and work. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds held on tight, grateful for every moment they'd been given. The years were kind to them. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren. They saw Samuel become a state senator, Emma's horse ranch become renowned throughout the West, Billy expand the Garrett ranch to over 5,000 acres. They saw automobiles replace horses on the roads, electricity come to Manasseh, the world change in ways they never could have imagined. But through it all, through every change and challenge, Willa and Jamie remained constants for each other. They still took evening walks when the weather permitted, still sat together by the fire in winter, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence, still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and love in familiar touches. In the spring of 1923, Jamie fell ill with pneumonia. Doc Brennan's son, who'd taken over his father's practice, did everything he could, but Jamie's lungs were weak from years of working in all weather, and he struggled to recover. For 3 weeks he fought, and Willa never left his side. On a warm May evening, with Willa holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, Jamie looked at his wife with eyes that still held all the love he'd felt the first time he'd seen her. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thin but clear, "for walking through that snow, for finding me, for giving me the best life a man could ask for." "Jamie, no," Willa's voice broke. "Don't you dare say goodbye to me. We still have more time. We still have more life to live together. We've had 40 years, love. 40 beautiful years." He reached up with his free hand and touched her cheek, the gesture as tender as it had been when he'd first touched her in that kitchen so long ago. "That's more than most people get, more than I ever thought I'd have. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. I know." He smiled, that same smile that had made her fall in love with him. "But I'm grateful for every moment. Every single moment with you has been a gift." Billy stepped forward and put his hand on his mother's shoulder, and she leaned into her son's support, even as she kept her eyes locked on Jamie's face. Emma was crying quietly, and Samuel stood with his arm around her, his own eyes wet with tears. "I love you," Willa said, the words fierce despite her tears. "I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until I take my last breath." "I know." Jamie's eyes were starting to drift closed. "I'll be waiting for you, Willa. When your time comes, I'll be waiting. We'll dance again under those stars. Promise?" "Promise." He took one more breath, let it out slowly, and was gone. Just like that, after 40 years together, Jamie Garrett left the world as peacefully as he'd lived in it, surrounded by the family he'd helped create with Willa. The grief was overwhelming. Willa felt like half of herself had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house with the noise and love that Jamie had always treasured. Billy insisted she stay in the main house, that he and Margaret would take care of her, and though Willa protested at first, she eventually agreed. The seasons turned. Summer came, then fall, then winter. Willa moved through her days with the determination that had kept her walking through that blizzard so many years ago. She missed Jamie with an ache that never fully subsided, but she found joy in her family, in the ranch they'd built together, in the legacy they'd created. On the anniversary of the day Jamie had found her in the snow, Willa bundled up in warm wool and had Billy drive her out to the spot where it had happened. The landscape had changed some over the decades, but she could still recognize it. Still remember the desperate hope she'd felt when she'd seen the town in the distance. Still feel the moment when she'd fallen and thought it was the end. She stood there for a long time, remembering the girl she'd been, and the life she'd lived. 41 years ago, she'd walked for miles through snow with nothing but rags, certain she was going to die. And then a cowboy had found her and dressed her in warm wool, and everything had changed. Thank you, she whispered to the wind, to Jamie's spirit, to whatever force had guided her through that storm. Thank you for every moment, every year, every heartbeat we shared. She felt a warmth despite the cold, as if Jamie was standing beside her, his arms around her one more time. And for a moment, just a moment, Willa could have sworn she heard his voice on the wind, saying the words he'd said to her 1,000 times over their life together. I love you, Willa. Always have, always will. Willa lived for 5 more years after Jamie's passing, long enough to see Billy's youngest son graduate from university, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild, long enough to know that the ranch and the family they'd built together would continue long after she was gone. She spent her final years in peace, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that her life had mattered, that the choice to keep walking through that snow had led to something beautiful and lasting. When she died quietly in her sleep in the winter of 1928 at the age of 65, her family mourned but also celebrated a life well lived. They buried her next to Jamie on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky full of stars. The gravestone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line that Billy had insisted on: together forever, as we always were meant to be. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to the love and hard work of Jamie and Willa Garrett. Their story became a family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, about the woman who walked through snow with nothing but rags, and the cowboy who dressed her in warm wool and gave her a life beyond her wildest dreams. And on quiet winter nights, when the snow fell soft over the Colorado landscape, people swore they could sometimes see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the fields, 2 souls who'd found each other against all odds and refused to be separated even by death. Jamie and Willa Garrett, together still, dancing under the stars the way they always had, their love story complete but never truly ending, living on in the land they'd built and the family they'd created and the legacy of love they'd left behind.